understanding the genetic aberrations, the human genome parallelly was used, and we decided that we could actually use the information from there from a therapeutic perspective, and we could have specifically molecular targeted therapy. Next, please. So the tyrosine kinase inhibitor pathway actually revolutionized cancer therapy. So what you have here is a cell. This could also be a cancer cell. In the center, you have a nucleus. In the nucleus, you have the DNA. The tumors that are mutated or are addicted to driver oncogene mutations, over here, the mutated one in this nucleus encodes abnormal, what we call the blue colored receptor that you see has suddenly automatically switched on and has not needed that pink signal, that external stimulus to switch it on. This, in fact, because it's bypassed the cell, this particular step, it's just growing uncontrollably. There's uncontrollable proliferation of the cells, which obviously leads to the tumor. So what your targeted therapy's main function was to actually go and automatically switch off this blue receptor, which in turn would switch off the growth signal of the cancer cell, and the cancer cell would potentially die. Next, please. Using this concept is how we created our TKIs. So for example, over here, I have a patient who's diagnosed with lung cancer, NSCLC adeno. She's got an L858R mutation. I'll give her a TKI. She responds hopefully very well. She's very lucky. She goes, has a PFS of, let's say, 11 months. And then suddenly we see she progresses. When she progresses, you again go in, you do a biopsy. If it's not an option, you do a liquid biopsy, and you again do molecular profiling. Hopefully you get maybe a T790M. On that, you give her osimertinib, and again, the cycle continues. Biopsy or liquid biopsy, molecular profiling, targeted therapy, and if no targeted therapy, chemotherapy, or whatever options are available. And this is how we have evolved. Next, please. Today, our options include chemotherapy. You've got a standalone chemotherapy, a standalone molecular targeted therapy, NIBS. Particularly your NIBS, you've got your checkpoint inhibitor therapies, which is immunotherapy, and you can also have a combination of these therapies. Next, please. So what we see over here is a pie chart basically highlighting all the, the genes, the biomarkers, the somatic aberrations that we see in adenotype of NSCLC. And whilst KRAS mutations are very, very common, particularly in the smoking cohort, there is a wide variety of somatic aberrations. And I call them somatic aberrations because all of them are not mutations. Some of them are fusions. There are a variety of other structural variants which are easily druggable by a variety of drugs that we treat. Next, please. Over here, what you see is just a schematic representation of what happens in the case of non-squamous cells, squamous cells. Again, ROS1, ALK, EGFR, very, very common. See over here. Next, please. So when I know that I have all these biomarkers that are associated with lung cancer, it becomes very important to understand the genomic landscape of my tumor, which means in one shot, using next generation sequencing, wouldn't it be absolutely lovely if you could get to see all these particular genes at one shot to understand how to treat your patient? And why would I do that? Because with EGFR, if I have a passenger mutation, like let's say a TP53, I know my patient is not going to have the ideal response that I'd like them to have, as they would have had if, let's say, they were just having an EGFR. A whole view, so you can make an educated guess as to how you'd like to treat your patients. Next, please. So these are some of the biomarkers that are in consideration when you think about targeted therapy in advanced NSCLC. And what is this? So next, please. So what this also allows us to do is that it helps us divide our tumors into what I like to call a dummy's guide to drug therapy, which is you've got those which are oncogene addicted. You need to know what the mutations are, what drug with the targeted therapy. And then there are those that it really doesn't matter what the mutation is. They're addicted to immunotherapy. Next, please. So when you get it right, they work beautifully. I mean, the results are absolutely phenomenal. And here's an example of a 59-year-old female, EGFR positive. She was started on Geftinib. And as not only radiologically, you can see that there has been a remarkable response, but also the patient had a better quality of life and actually reported that she felt much better. But one thing to note is these molecular targeted therapies are highly effective, but they're not curative. As I said earlier, if the disease progresses, you come back to the cycle of having to do a biopsy or a liquid biopsy, molecular profiling, and again, testing. Next, please. So when we're talking about all these genes, Why do I think NGS is a good platform? Next, please. When we're using very standard, standard traditional methods, you're just getting to the tip of the iceberg. And even in tip of the iceberg, you're just seeing a very small part of the EGFR, ALK, ROS, MET, BRAF. What we tend to miss are the other mutations that are underwater, that are getting lost. And the reason those are important is that while they may not be actionable targeted therapy, they actually help define as to how the tumor is evolving. It actually can give you a premonition as to how your patient could possibly respond to therapy. Next, please. So why I'm not going to belittle and say that NGS any day is superior or better than our traditional methods. No, that's not the thing. But in today's day and age, I think NGS, there's concordance between all these standard of cares, the traditional methods of IHC, FISH, PCR versus NGS. I think there's good concordance data. I do know it's more cost effective today, improved turnaround time. While all that is there, the 2 points that really stand out for me is tissue preservation. You need hardly 20 to 50 nanograms of DNA to run an NGS panel and actually look at all these possible biomarkers of interest and get a plethora of information from them. Simultaneously, for example, in EGFR, if I'm going to just be doing a PCR, I'm going to be looking at, let's say, EGFR exon 19, 20, 21. I could potentially be losing out on other coding regions that could have targeted therapy associated with it. So I'm losing the potential to discover novel actionable targets. Next, please. And a classic example where I feel I've learned this is in-house, where in 2018, 2019, we had around 658 patients who were newly diagnosed cases or all had come with metastatic disease. And for them, while we got around a 39% actionable mutation, that was not important. What was important was, next please, was the fact that when we saw this information, while EGFR ALK topped the list, what was interesting is that we were able to catch P53 in patients who were newly diagnosed, who came in positive with EGFR, which means therapy was accordingly, their management was accordingly done based on this molecular profiling. Next, please. In addition to that, we also saw cases with concomitant genomic alterations. And why was this important? Because certain hotspot regions, certain regions in, say, EGFR, because I see this right at the top of my screen, some of these regions responded better, had a better efficacy to certain drugs. Even though they were EGFR, you could have one mutation that responded better to afatinib versus the other mutation that could possibly respond better to erlotinib. So when you know you've got two conflicting mutations that are simultaneously presenting, you could take what was common between them and treat your patient accordingly. Next, please. So now that we have all this information, what have we learned from our targets? Next, please. I think one of the biggest takeaways from our from NGS and targeted testing is that if the patient molecularly matches to a target, we know the results are far, far more superior than that to a patient who's just who's been put just on plain chemotherapy. And these two Kaplan-Meier graphs, I think, very, very beautifully illustrate how their patient has a better PFS, HR, etc. Next, please. We've also learned that, and this is the most important lesson, that sometimes identifying one important somatic mutation can make a huge difference. And this is a very, very important and excellent case, especially in the area of melanomas. So this was a 38-year-old male, melanoma with subcutaneous metastatic deposits, failed lines of therapy. With chemotherapy, when they wanted to put him on dacarbazine, they knew he would have approximately a 5% response. So molecular profiling was done. He tested positive for BRAF V600E, which is very common in melanoma metastatic cases. The patient was started on vemurafenib, and as you can see here, a picture speaks 1,000 words. He's responded very, very well. Next, please. So this takes me to the next segment. With melanomas, while yes, you've got immunotherapy, patients doing really well on them, other genomic aberrations like ERBB4, NF1, MYC, RB1, CDK2NA, HRAS, etc. The one that really stands out are your BRAF mutations. Out of these BRAF mutations, out of melanomas, 50% of them actually are positive for BRAF mutation. And out of that 50% cohort, around 80 to 85% actually are positive for BRAF V600E. And along with that, is you have BRAF V600K, you've got BRAF V600R, V600D. These may be very rare, but again, patients who, for melanoma patients, and this is only in melanoma cases where we see that apart from the V600E, the other BRAFs, patients with melanomas actually respond very well to a combination of BRAF with a MEK inhibitor. And this takes me to the part that while BRAF is an area of interest, why not look at real-time PCR? It is cost-effective, shorter turnaround time, and is very accurate. Next, please. So the real-time PCR is essentially an assay that monitors the accumulation of a DNA product from the PCR reaction in real time. Next, please. It follows the same principle as a regular PCR. So to track the DNA amplification in real time, probes are added, and these probes the probe is essentially a nucleotide that is labeled with a fluorescent reporter and a quencher. The quencher decreases the fluorescence intensity during a PCR cycle, and so the probe denatures and anneals to the target sequence. For every amplification of the target sequence, a fluorescence reporter is released from the probe. To better understand, let's simplify this. Next, please. It's important to understand that your real-time PCR, the instrument, has two components. One is a thermal cycler, which is your PCR machine, which means it will undergo those typical steps of PCR, your denaturation, annealing, next please, elongation. And then at the last step, what it does is once the DNA strand is completely polymerized, it releases a reporter molecule. Next, please. This reporter molecule gets released and it increases the intensity inside this, these little Eppendorf tubes. This is where the second component of the PCR machine comes into play, which is your optical module. Its job is to detect the fluorescence intensity during those tubes. So as you see, as the cycles increase, this reporter gets released in there, the intensity increases. Next, please. As this intensity increases, it gets measured and gets converted into these amplification plot curves. And what you see over here, it gets converted, which results in our, over here, I'm giving you an example of a V600E positive patient with DNA sequencing. Again, a very robust, very, very well validated mechanism, a very well validated platform. Next, please. So my key takeaways are, in my practice, when I have a patient who gets referred to the cancer genetics clinic from a lung, I do like doing upfront a good NGS, a molecular profiling, looking at all the genes of interest to give me a broader landscape, to understand the genomic landscape of my tumor. Whereas in the case of melanomas, I am pretty comfortable just using real-time PCR to help identify if there's a BRAF mutation, which is commonly seen and associated with melanomas. And on next, please. And on that note, thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Over to our next part of the meeting. I will just share a short video. So I would like to hand it over to our next speaker, Dr. Nitesh Rohatgi. Sir, I've just unmuted your mic, so we can just start with the presentation.
Thank you. Am I visible?
Yeah, we can see you.
Oh, Dr. Parekh, if you can see me, then I'm visible. Thank you very much for having
Thank
me.
you.
Okay, I think it's the new kid on the block, BRAF and non-small cell lung cancer. And I'll try and in 15, maybe 18, 20 minutes, just whiz past what is new understanding. Do I have control as well, or do I say next slide? Okay,
Just
I'll
say
say
next slide.
next slide, yeah, please. So I'm Dr. Nitesh Rohatgi, and these were my disclaimers. The key objective was to understand the role of BRAF, which I said is a new kid on the block in non-small cell lung cancer. I think we have all gained enough and very good experience of managing EGFR, ALK, ROS, and now we're gaining somewhat on immunotherapy. But I think this is new kid, so it's yet to learn, but it's very interesting nevertheless. We will gain a little bit on BRAF testing, which I heard some very good discussion on already. And we will try and review clinical data. And I think if there are more questions, Dr. Dhar can answer more about the diagnostic and testing. And I'll try and take up the clinical ones. Next, please. Next, please. So essentially, what we're talking is not a new pathway. I think we've all known how the KRAS pathway goes downstream to BRAF and MEK. And I think the big problem has been the MEK, because even if we've been blocking the BRAF with BRAF inhibitors for a long time in melanoma, we've seen resistant mechanisms, which is very logical considering that there was a downstream mutation in many of these patients. And even if not mutation, you're seeing upstreaming of MEK very commonly. Now, melanoma has 50 to 60% with BRAF mutation, and certainly non-small cell has not even close to that 2%. But considering non-small cell lung cancer, close to 70,000 to 90,000 new patients of lung cancer in India, that 2% makes a lot of patients as compared to melanoma, which even if it's 50 to 60% is possibly a small problem for our patients. Next, please. And I'll skip that to next, please. And what this is really trying to say is that the most common mutation is V600. There are many other mutations, as many as 37 in non-small cell lung cancer. But please let me give my view on this, which is that focus on V600 because we really don't understand the others very well at the moment. Do not presume, and I'll say that again, do not presume that if it's non-V600, it will be equally effective with either BRAF inhibitor or the combination. So I think although there is some data, there are some suggestions where to and where not to. For the purpose of this discussion and possibly this year, we should be focusing on V600 when we're talking about BRAF. Next, please. This is a very important graph, which essentially says that patients with V600 are a very aggressive cohort. And I think now that we are seeing the mutation, we are seeing how these patients, when left to chance or left to standard of care, do very badly. And you can see in the next slide. Could you go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is what I was trying to show, that if you look at the V600 graph and look at the 6 months, and remember the 6 months because these patients do badly. At 6 months, you don't even have 20% patients who have survived your therapy. So this is a aggressive cohort of adenocarcinoma, which you're not finding EGFR, ALK, ROS1. You may find PD-L1 very commonly in this population, but that does not apply it's going to work because many of them are initially chemotherapy resistant. When I saw this graph for the first time, it brought back a few years of my practice. And when I wondered what the hell happened to this adenocarcinoma non-smoker and why were they so aggressive and why did immunotherapy not work? Why did chemotherapy not work? I started wondering if some of them were BRAF mutated. So remember, at 6 months, less than 20% survival is the cohort of adenocarcinoma which you're working on, and unlike small cell, they're not chemosensitive either. Next slide, please. So the treatment remains suboptimal for these patients, and that's what I was trying to emphasize. One third of the patient remain untreated because by the time you get around treating them, they have become poor performance status. 57 receive best supportive care in the second line. Doublet chemotherapy is the most common option because many of them are not detected. Detection has been a huge challenge for BRAF because it's the adopted son. We do it in reflex testing, and we've not been thinking about it because there was no treatment available. So only when we've been doing broad spectrum, we've been picking up some of these patients. And the French registry showed 52% with BRAF mutation received doublet chemotherapy, which we will show is not very effective. And in patients with driver mutation, targeted therapy can help to live longer. We've known this in almost every targetable agent as long as you have the therapy. Next slide, please. And this is another example. This is the summary of current treatment guideline. Pushes us that patient with good performance status, we give doublet chemotherapy, even with immunotherapy when we don't find targeted therapy. So if you're not looking for BRAF or you don't chance upon it because you've done multi-gene, you're likely to give this chemotherapy to these patients. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And it tends not to work. So what we are trying to emphasize here is that unless we do broad spectrum profiling for these patients, and I do know a lot of centers in India don't believe that, and I would accept those centers provided they have a short turnaround time. And I think most of these centers which are not doing a broad molecular profiling are doing it because they're very confident of both their positive rates, their validation, and their short turnaround time. And in fact, these are the centers who we use for validation. So I think for them, it's fine. But for majority of other parts of the country and other centers where treatment is being given, I think we are left behind to use broad spectrum so that we can get EGFR, ALK, ROS1, and now BRAF as well on the same platform. Leave aside the fact that we also need to possibly check for METRAT and HER2 in the next 1 or 2 years, and the PDL1 is important to do in the part of the same platform, or not even platform, at least in the same testing. Next slide, please. And this re-emphasizes that now it's a part of the consensus guideline. I think that does not mean for me, and maybe others who when they join the panel can talk about it, but that does not mean for me that you use a broad spectrum 500, 800 gene panels. What I'm trying to say is that you need a broad spectrum panel which at least includes all targetable agents. Whether you want to do more or not, that's I leave it to your discretion and understanding of these panels. But a broad spectrum panel without wasting time, and extremely importantly, without wasting tissue, because that becomes an issue, I think we need to get on with all broad spectrum testing together. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that, I think we need to go on to the next slide and talk about the fact that once you have picked up a BRAF positive mutation, what do we do next? So what we have said so far, this is a disease with poor prognosis. Patients don't do well. At 6 months, less than 20% people have survived. Chemotherapy and possibly chemoimmunotherapy doesn't do wonders. And the testing wastes time, tissue gets over and waste time, and many of these patients are not fit enough for therapy by then. So do broad spectrum testing, accept that every patient, just like they're thinking every patient has coronavirus, except every adenocarcinoma may have a hidden BRAF. And the minute you pick it up, I think you have a drug now. Let's talk about the drug. Next slide, please. And this is the two drugs, the upstream dabrafenib, which is a BRAF inhibitor, and the downstream trametinib, which is a MEK inhibitor. And you can see that the V600 is the key target here. Next slide, please. And this is DGCI approved. Next slide, please. And this is what I was trying to say, that while the dabrafenib is a BRAF inhibitor sitting right at the top, the MEK inhibition is extremely important because we'll see how single agent may not be as effective for a majority of our patients. Next slide, please. So this was the key phase 2 study which led to the approval, which very interestingly, they divided into 3 cohorts. And I think that was a very good way of doing a phase 2 open label study. It was not randomized, and of course it was phase 2, so they shouldn't have done that in the first place. But they picked up 3 cohorts. One first cohort where they had more than one platinum-based chemotherapy in the past, and now there was a BRAF patient with obviously progression, and they gave dabrafenib monotherapy. So there was nothing blocking downstream, but you had dabrafenib monotherapy. In cohort B, again a pre-treated cohort, again 1 to 3 lines pre-treatment. You'll see how many in a second. And they gave dabrafenib and trametinib as a combination. And then you logically think this is the cohort that's going to come to you most. But then there's a cohort C, and we possibly need to talk about this. How do you get to cohort C? Because these are the patients who upfront you knew had BRAF inhibition, BRAF mutation, and you gave them combination upfront. I would love to see these patients and start them upfront, because that's what we do for all our mutations. And I asked this question recently on a panel that if you had BRAF, would you do upfront therapy for all? And I think majority said yes. But I wonder if we can get these patients, because they are symptomatic, they are unwell, and we would have already started therapy by then. So I think what I'm trying to emphasize here, while this is an ideal cohort, practically we may not get to see them. So it's really the cohort A and B that we'll be working on. But we'll see the data from cohort C, because that's very interesting as well. Next slide, please. Now, interestingly, this is a phase 2 trial. Please remember that. So the primary endpoint was response rate, and the secondary endpoint was PFS and DOR, OS, and safety, and the kinetics. But I will emphasize that that was a good endpoint to study, and possibly that's why FDA agreed on this and approved it on ORR as a primary endpoint, because, as I said, these are poor prognostic patients. They don't do well. These are the patients who you've been wondering why they do badly. And if they respond, they'll survive. Next slide, please. So this was the cohort A. This was the patient who had dabrafenib alone and had more than 1 line platinum therapy. And have a look at this, that almost half the patient was 2nd line and beyond. So these are pre-treated group of patients, all of whom have adenocarcinoma, and 2/3 were current or former smokers. So these are smoker group. This is not divided on smoking and not smoking. Next cohort, next slide, please. And let's look at cohort B. This is, so remember, this is the patient who had chemotherapy and have combination therapy. And nearly all adenocarcinomas, 3 of them were current or former smokers. So again, smoker group. Unlike all the adenocarcinoma targeted therapy, this is different. These are smokers as well. And 1/3 of these patients received more than 2 lines of previous chemotherapy. I think we're going to see a lot of these patients in our practice. Next slide. At least for the year. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. And this is the cohort C. No, go back, please. So this is cohort C, very important cohort. All adenocarcinomas, right? Almost all. There was a few adenosquame, but actually all adenocarcinomas. Now, the thing which was not covered in the data, and I looked for that, and I think that's very interesting. And I was recently talking to the group at Tata who's done a lot of work in this cohort. Dr. Vikas Salreja was one of the panels. And I asked him how many of these are bronchoalveolar carcinomas, because both my patients who I went on compassionate use had bronchoalveolar carcinoma. And he said, fair amount. So while this is not scientific evidence, I think if you get a bronchoalveolar carcinoma in a non-smoker or a smoker, and previously we have not been looking for targeted therapy, I actually push you guys to please look for broad spectrum BRAF in this category of patients. Next slide, please. And now we come to the phase 2. Okay, next slide. I think we've discussed this. And this is the efficacy of the therapy. And I'll briefly go through it, and then we'll do a comparative in the end. So I think there are lots of redundant slides here. But we saw no complete response rate and somewhat stable disease in 29%. Can we go to next slide? This is cohort B. Next slide. Okay, so just have a brief look, but we'll do a comparative in a minute. And this is the majority of patients in cohort B experience tumor shrinkage. And this is a very beautiful waterfall plot, especially when you're talking about a BRAF mutation. These are bad patients. They do badly. We saw the graph of less than 20% patients who were surviving beyond 6 months. This is a very good response rate waterfall of this category of patients. 63% is a good number for this category. Next slide, please. And this is a swimmer's plot showing that patients who did well, and look at 6 months again, look at 6 months again, you start seeing the majority are crossing that. 50% responses were ongoing at the time of data cutoff, right? And that's a very huge number for patients who were previously doing badly. Next slide, please. And I think we'll skip this and go to the crux of the matter. And next slide. And this is again cohort C. These are, remember, these are patients with treatment naive. So if anybody by chance it does get through them, don't be shy to give them upfront BRAF, because if you have any doubts that upfront may not be effective, and I must start with chemotherapy, I would actually say chemotherapy does badly in these patients. So do start with BRAF inhibition if you chance upon these patients. So this is a affirmation of the fact that upfront works extremely well. Next slide, please. And swimmer spot for that. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay, so this is the crux of the matter, and that's why I was skipping all these slides, because I think they're a bit redundant. So this is the three cohorts. Cohort A, monotherapy, cohort B, combination, both of which had previous chemotherapy. Cohort C, treatment naive combination therapy of BRAF and MEK. The objective response rate, which was the primary endpoint defined in this phase 2 trial, was 33% in patients who had monotherapy after chemotherapy. 63 and 64% patients who had either combination or who were treatment naive and combination. So what this teaches us is, don't wait if you don't have to for these patients. If you don't have a mutation, that's fine. If you're sending it while you're waiting for chemo, you have to treat these patients. But if you somehow chance upon, or your patient is progressing after one cycle and you have BRAF in hand, I would actually want to shift this patient to a combination of BRAF and trametinib. And I think that's the the best way of getting a response to these patients. Now let's look at the disease control rate, and you'll see 80% of patients who had post-chemotherapy and 75 who had treatment naive were controlled by this combination, while there were only 60% who controlled dabrafenib alone. Now remember, this is phase 2, this is short term, so really the disease control rate may not be very reflective. And even PFS was secondary endpoint. Yet you see that if you start with combination, or if you give combination, you see almost 10 months of PFS in this group. There's no comparator, but we have a comparator in a cross trial or observation registries where we saw less than 20% 6-month survival. Okay, next please. Okay, so could you go back? And could you go back one more slide, please? Sorry. Okay, so I'll just brief this very slightly. I want to look at 6 months in this, which is between 5 and 10, a little above 5. And I want you to go up all the way, because I'm sure you can't see my cursor. If you go up, you can see at 6 months, we are sitting at 70%. And I did show you slide number 3, where BRAF V600 mutation lung cancer patients at 6 months was sitting less than 20. So I wanted to think about what if you're comparing this graph to that graph, and think about the effect this drug can have on this 2%, but not a very small number, because we have huge lung cancer population in India. Okay, next slide. And I think once we know that this drug is effective, it's extremely important that we learn about the toxicity management, because it's very unique to this combination. Now, I know some of us have had experience of using BRAF inhibitors in colorectal cancer, certainly in melanoma. So we are aware of how to manage toxicity. And also amongst the toxicity, the bigger toxicity is from the BRAF dabrafenib and less from trametinib. And pyrexia is the big thing, which is new, and we don't know how to manage, and is a trouble because it will be seen in majority of your patients. But look at the entire list: asthenia, hyperkeratosis, decreased appetite, cough in a lung cancer patient, fatigue, skin papillomas, dry skin, alopecia, and nausea. Most of these are things that we are not used to managing, because these are not common to many other TKIs. Some are. Next slide, please. And I think we'll go to next slide again. Okay, so this is a cohort B, and I'm trying to show that the pyrexia was the most common AE. 46% had it, and only 2% had grade 3, which made them hospitalized and all. But most of them have it, and yours could be 2%. But a lot of patients getting pyrexia and patient calling in and saying, I'm getting fever. And of course, you're testing them for coronavirus. But considering they don't have it, the question is, this is totally drug-induced. So look at these patients and manage them. And I'll just tell you how to. Just give me a second. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Now, the 3 steps for pyrexia management in patient treated with combination is A, interrupt treatment, especially with dabrafenib. So watch, this does not talk about interrupting treatment with both. It talks about interrupt treatment with dabrafenib. And next is to initiate antipyretics, either ibuprofen or paracetamol, both are allowed. And I guess what I would do in these combinations, start with paracetamol and then go on to using the next line. And if it still doesn't work, we can use oral corticosteroids. Next line. So this is again a chart of how to manage these patients. So any event, clinical evaluation for infection, hypersensitivity, laboratory workup, hydration as required, this is a no-brainer. You have to do that. First event, administer antipyretic if clinically indicated. Interrupt dabrafenib. Once pyrexia resolves to baseline, restart at the same dose level. I'm saying this again, restart at the same dose level, right? Now, once you've done that, just give me a second. Sorry. So once, sorry about this, but I guess this is the problem of being at home. There's some crisis you get involved. Okay, so now second event. So you've given dabrafenib, you've withdrawn it, you've given antipyretics, and the patient gets fever again. Do the same thing as the first event, but consider oral corticosteroid. So not too much, prednisolone 10 mg for 5 days. Third event, interrupt dabrafenib, and once it's solved, go back to 1 dose level. We'll talk about this. And this will happen to your patient when you use it, right? Thankfully, my both patients managed on interruption at first event and did not, one patient did not get it again, the other one got it again and did not get it the third event. But she most likely will need to be going on a dose reduction in the next time she gets fever. Next one, please. And so this is the recommendation. You start at 150 mg twice daily and 2 mg of trametinib. You start at 150 mg dabrafenib twice daily and 2 mg. And do remember, this is to be taken empty stomach. So remember, look at the last line. Either should be taken without food or 1 hour before or 2 hours after meals. So this is extremely important. Food interaction, 150 twice a day, 2 mg daily. If, as we're going to the previous chart, if you need dose reduction, 100 mg twice daily, 1.5 mg once daily, again reduction 50 mg twice daily, once daily. And I'm saying, please do the dabrafenib reduction first, because that's the one causing the fever and almost all the side effects, except trametinib causes diarrhea. So this reduction is most likely to be for dabrafenib and not for trametinib, but do read the guideline as you develop side effects for your patients. Next slide, please. So the safety profile of dabra and trametinib is manageable and similar to previous reported melanoma study. The most common AE was pyrexia and GI more trametinib, pyrexia and skin more dabrafenib, nausea also more dabrafenib. Pyrexia was frequent in all cohorts and occurred in 33% of cohorts A, knowing that almost 33% of that was because of dabrafenib alone. And pyrexia engagement events are managed with the protocol which I showed you, but that's a part of literature and easily available, so do follow that. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Wonderful, Nitesh. Thank you so much. Kashish, please go on to the next part.
So our next speaker for the evening is Dr. Niti Raisda. Ma'am, I have just I have made you the co-host. You can share your slides.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Now you can just make it full screen. Perfect.
So good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me today. Quite a lot has been spoken already by Dr. Dhar and by Dr. Nitesh, but I'll be focusing on metastatic melanoma. We all know that this has not been a problem in our country for all these years, and we have not really focused. But I think all of us see a change in our practice. We have had more number of metastatic melanoma, especially in our continent. We don't have so much of cutaneous, we more have acral melanomas. And what we know basically is historically metastatic melanoma is a condition with extremely poor prognosis. But what has changed in the past few years is landmark use of BRAF directed therapies and of course checkpoint inhibitors at the same time. So what we have found is that 50% of all metastatic melanomas have BRAF mutation. Almost 85% of BRAF mutation is seen in V600E. That is, in the 600 position of BRAF protein, valine is replaced by glutamic acid. This is seen in almost 85% patients. However, in the rest of 5%, 5 to 7%, we also have another mutation in which valine is replaced by lysine. That's known as V600K. The rest of the 7 to 10% are other BRAF mutations, which we don't see very commonly. What I'll be talking today is focus on V600E and K. Now we know that this is the most frequent oncogenic driver in melanomas. Almost 50% of all patients have positive in metastatic melanoma. They are a poor risk subset with high risk disease, poor survival outcomes, and possibly aggressive overall outlook. We definitely need to focus on diagnostics. The current diagnostic modalities include PCR-based tests, immunohistochemistry, and next-gen sequencing. Dr. Dhar spoke extensively on next-gen sequencing, but what is also important to understand is in BRAF testing in melanoma, we can actually use combination modalities, combination diagnostic modalities like next-gen sequencing and PCR or IHC along with next-gen sequencing. So as Dr. Nitesh had already discussed, we are focused today on two drugs which act on the RAS pathway, that is dabrafenib, RAF pathway, and the MEK pathway, that is trametinib. Now, this is primarily through MAP kinase signaling pathway. MAP kinase being mitogen activating factor, mitogen activating protein kinase signaling, which is known as the RAS, RAF, MEK, ERK pathway. Now, any changes in the entire pathway can cause either a complete switch on or switch off, which means that signaling occurs continuously, resulting in increased growth, increased proliferation, increased survival of tumor cells, and invasiveness. When we actually have blockade on two paths, that is RAF path and along with MEK path, what we try to achieve is a reduced risk of treatment resistance and also reduced risk of certain toxicities which can occur if we use a single agent, that is BRAF inhibitor alone. So after we had extensive research, which I'll speak about 3 randomized controlled trial, dabrafenib which is the inhibitor of BRAF pathway, was actually approved by FDA as a single agent in May of 2013. So this was at that time approved only for V600E mutation. We got a combination approval that is dabrafenib along with trametinib approval was actually approved in January of 2014, that is 6 months from the first approval. And this combination got an approval in stage 3 melanomas post-surgery for adjuvant setting in May of 2018. Similarly, trametinib approvals, that is the MEK pathway inhibitor, came around the same time. The first approval was May 2013, and it took 5 subsequent years for its approval in the adjuvant settings in the melanoma. Now, I'll just like to make a brief mention at this great woman who is actually director of Melanoma Institute of Australia at Sydney, Dr. Georgina Long. Most of the studies I'll quote here have been published and presented by her at various platforms. She has about 240 publications in NEJM, The Lancet, Nature, and all of which are focused in melanoma. She currently stays in Sydney, and what she has said is that we have been able to convert a metastatic melanoma scenario into a treatable condition, which did not exist 5 years back. So what I'll be talking about are 3 trials. 2 of them are phase 3 trials, which is COMBI-D and COMBI-V. Now, COMBI-D is combination drug, that is dabrafenib, trametinib in one arm and dabrafenib in the other arm. This trial had about 423 patients. COMBI-V was a subsequent trial which had about 704 patients, in which one arm was combination, that is dabrafenib along with trametinib, and the other arm was vimorafenib, which is again a RAF inhibitor used as a single agent. The third study was actually a phase 2 study. We'll be focusing on part C of this phase 2 study, which is known as study 220, which has about 162 patients. So all in all, for establishing these two drugs for metastatic melanoma, it took about 1,300 patients through 3 clinical randomized trials. The Combi-V had dabrafenib, trametinib in 1 hour. Dabrafenib in this was given in the dose of 150 milligram twice a day. Trametinib was given in 2 milligram once a day. And the second arm was with 1:1 randomization was vemurafenib given orally as 960 milligram twice a day. Only patients with histologically confirmed stage 3C and stage 4 BRAF expressing melanomas with only 2 primary mutations, that is V600E and with V600K were selected. They were in good performance status, who fulfilled RECIST 1.1 criteria and who had not received previous BRAF or MEK therapy. Now, the interesting part of these studies were that initially crossover was prohibited, but subsequent to the release of first overall survival, the crossover was permitted. So people in vemurafenib arm actually moved over to dabrafenib and trametinib, and this could have changed the survival outcomes, which we'll see later. The other trial was Combi-D, which had 1:1 randomization. It again was multicentric trial in which one arm was dabrafenib in combination with trametinib, and the other arm was dabrafenib as a single agent used as 150 milligram twice a day. Now, again, in this crossover was not allowed, but the cases who progressed on the single agent dabrafenib arm were later on moved over to the combination arm. In both the study, the primary endpoint was progression-free survival, and the secondary endpoint was overall survival, overall response rate, the duration of response, safety, and pharmacokinetics. Both arms in both the trials were matched as per the statistics. They had gender matched, ECOG performance status matched. In both the studies, almost 90% for V600E mutation on the BRAF, almost 10% for V600K. It was matched as per the metastatic stage, and they were staged as M1A when only skin and soft tissue was involved, M1B when lung was involved, where M1C when any other visceral site other than CNS was involved, which could include lung and skin as well. So they were matched according to the metastatic settings. The M1D category, which is CNS only disease, were excluded from this trial. They were also matched according to the LDH as presentation. So LDH could be either normal at presentation, it could be more than 1 times the upper limit of normal and less than 2 times the upper limit of normal, or it could be greater than 2 times. So there were actually 3 arms as regards to LDH, then percentage of visceral disease and number of disease sites, whether they were less than 3 or more than 3 inside. So as per the Combi-V trial, which was combination arm as compared to vemurafenib, the overall survival in the combination arm was 26.1 months, as against 17.8 months in the vemurafenib arm. In the Combi-D trial, it was again almost the same. The dabrafenib and the trametinib combination arm had overall survival of about 25.1 months versus 18.7 months in the dabrafenib alone arm. And progression-free survival were also similar in both the arms, with about 12.1 months in the Combi-V trial versus 7.3. And in the Combi-D trial, it was 11 months versus 8.8 months. So 12.1 months in the Combi-V and 11 months in the Combi-D trial. The third study design was actually a phase 2 randomized study. It had part A and part B, which was drug-drug interaction and the safety profile study. We will dwell into the part C, which had about 162 cases. And this had actually 3 arms. The one arm was combination arm with dabrafenib and trametinib. The second arm was dabrafenib and trametinib, where trametinib was in 50% dose. Only 1 milligram was used in this case. And the third arm was dabrafenib as a single agent. Again, in this trial, crossover was allowed at a later stage. So in this trial again, we had almost very similar median overall survival of around 25 months. Combi-V had 26 months, Combi-D had 25 months, and study 220 again had 25 months as the overall survival. Progression-free survival again in this was 9.4 months, which is probably a little less than the other 2 studies. And I would think it was because that crossover in both the studies was early and in this study was kind of late. So this is the summary of all the landmark trial for BRAF mutation metastatic melanoma, in which median progression-free survival was 12 months in the Combi-V arm. Combi-D trial was 11 months. The median overall survival was about 26 months in the combination arm and 25 months in the Combi-D and phase 2 study. What is interesting to understand is in the patients who in study 220, the 1 year overall survival was in the tune of 80%, which was very high. It was about 51% in the second year. The 3 year overall survival was about 38%. And during the 4th and the 5th year, the overall survival seemed to have stabilized and it stayed at 30% and 28%. So what it means is the patient who had good response at 4 years actually stayed. And this, the results are still ongoing and further data is yet to be published. So what did the overall survival regression tree analysis showed? They were actually subclassified in 5 distinct patient populations. And the population of patient which did the best was the people who had normal LDH at presentation and less than 3 sites of disease. Now, these patients, this particular subset with normal LDH at presentation and less than 3 sites of disease had about 90% survival at 1 year and 70% survival at 3 years. This next subset was a subset with normal LDH at presentation. However, they had more than 3 disease sites at presentation and they did about 40% at 3 years. They still had good survival, but it was much less than the subset of population which had less than 3 subsites. Now, in the next subset, which was LDH, which was large at presentation, the cases with normal the performance status of 0 had good survival. The subset of patients with performance status of 1 or more than 1 had only 16% survival at 3 years. This is reflected nicely in this graph. What about the responses? In all the 3 studies combined, that is Combi-V, Combi-D and 220 study, the overall response rate and the disease control rate was almost in the tune of 90%. So in the Combi-V study, the combination arm with dabrafenib and trametinib has disease control rate of almost 90%, which was 92% in the Combi-D study and 100% in study 220. So this is probably an exceptional data in which 100% disease control rate was seen in all the patients initially. Almost 19% of these patients achieved complete response. What is also interesting to understand is that there were almost 68 patients in the Combi-V and 38 patients in the Combi-D arm, which had complete response, which makes a total of 106. And out of this 106, 58% are in CR even at this juncture. So at a median follow-up at the time of presentation, which was actually in 2018, 39 months follow-up, they had sustained CR. Not just, and also the other thing was the people who had partial response achieved complete response, and the median duration of achieving complete response was only 6 months, that is 5.6 months. What is the quality of life and safety analysis of this? The quality of life and safety was seen by EORTC quality of life questionnaire with C30 template, which assessed the overall global health. And the combination arm in both the studies, that is Combi-V and Combi-D, was in favor of the combination arm versus vimurafenib as a single agent or dabrafenib as a single agent. Summarizing the toxicities, but Dr. Nitesh has already mentioned that the 2 drugs, that is combination of dabrafenib along with trametinib, more than 20% cases would have nausea, would have diarrhea, would have fatigue, chills and headache, and some of them would have vomiting, arthralgia, hypertension. What is interesting to understand is 60% of all these patients would have pyrexia. This pyrexia could be either grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and almost 5% would completely discontinue these studies or not continue any form of dabrafenib or trametinib combination because of pyrexia, which is not resolving. The adverse events of special interest which were noted here were a small degree of photosensitivity, which was very less in the combination arm versus vimurafenib as a single agent. Vimurafenib also had a higher incidence of cutaneous squamous cell carcinoma. But the unfortunate thing here is that 1% of the total study population had secondary melanomas, which were seen, which is also an adverse event of special interest, which we should be talking about. What precautions we must take when we are giving this combination? At baseline, measure the left ventricular ejection fraction by an echocardiogram. Hemorrhages should be assessed from time to time. Visual disturbances in the form of retinopathy, central retinal venous occlusion, chorioretinopathy should be assessed. There is an incidence of deep venous thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, colitis, and even perforation noted in such individuals. So what they have found over time is that these toxicities are not cumulative. The incidence of adverse events have decreased over the next 6 to 12 months of therapy. These, all the adverse events peak in the first 6 months, but all the adverse events have nearly halved in the subsequent 6 to 12 months of therapy. And most importantly, pyrexia. The other adverse events which actually show regression include fatigue, nausea, headache, diarrhea, etc. And this was same across all the trial. Now, what is the dosage? Again, Dr. Nitesh has said, but let me reiterate that at this juncture, we have 75 milligram capsules available for dabrafenib, which is given two capsules in the morning and 2 capsules in the evening, given 12 hours apart. It has to be given at one time, either morning or evening, with 2 milligram of capsule trametinib. This is preferably given 1 hour after food or 2 hours after meals. If dose reduction is done, then there are dose reduction protocol, which I'll be discussing. How do we manage pyrexia, which is seen in almost 60% of all patients taking this combination, and almost 6% of these will have grade 3. So first, interrupt therapy. Occasionally, we may intend to continue trametinib. Most of the situation, we might interrupt both the treatment, that is dabrafenib and trametinib. How do we manage pyrexia? Pyrexia should be managed as per the standard guidelines by use of either paracetamol or ibuprofen. We would all definitely want to rule out infection in such case. A serum procalcitonin might be a very important indicator. If infection is included and drug is directly correlated with pyrexia, then occasionally we may think of oral corticosteroid intake. Now, when a person has high fever, we have to watch for dehydration. There has been a small incidence of renal insufficiency noticed in these patients because of dehydration again, and of course, hypotension and subsequent ICU care. We reinitiate therapy, and if the pyrexia resolves with basic medication, we would want to initiate therapy at the same dose level. If the pyrexia is not managed with routine measures, we might want to do dose reduction. Dose reduction guidelines are the same which we would use for any other therapy. So dose modification includes multiple levels of modification. Grade 1 and grade 2 adverse event will not warrant any dose modification. Any intolerable grade 2 or probably grade 3 will require interruption of therapy. We may want to start the same dose level or one level reduced dose level, and grade 4 toxicity generally would warrant permanent discontinuation. Dabrafenib has 150 milligram as the first standard dosing twice a day, which moves to 100 milligram twice a day. The second dose reduction includes 75 milligram twice a day, and the third dose reduction is 50 milligram. Trametinib, there's a 25% dose reduction from 2 milligram to 1.5 milligram to 1 milligram. So in summary, the combination of dabrafenib and trametinib has been used in first-line treatment of adult patients with unresectable or metastatic melanoma with BRAF V600 mutation. At this juncture, it's also approved for stage 3 adjuvant settings of melanoma. All the 3 trials had excellent results, with Combi-D and Combi-V showing a 3-year overall survival of about 45%. The patient with good subset, that's the cases who presented with normal LDH and less than 3 organ site, had almost 70% overall survival at 3 years. In the phase 2 220 study, the overall survival at 5 years was about 28%. The most common toxicity is pyrexia, seen in 60% of individuals, and about 5% will require permanent discontinuation because of pyrexia. Most of the adverse events are managed uneventfully over time with no cumulative toxicity. Thanks so much.
Wonderful, Niti. Thank you very much. Kashish, can we move over to Dr. Sajjan, please?
Dr. Rajpurohit, can you hear me? Yeah.
Good evening, all, and thank you, Dr. Purvi sir. And I'd like to call upon my panelists. So, Kashish, do we have Dr. Gopal Sharma, Dr. Avinash,
Yes,
Dr. Shivam Singla, and Dr. Suman Kalyan?
Dr. Suman, Dr. Gopal, and Dr. Shivam, we request you to please unmute yourself. Yes.
Yeah, done.
Dr. Shiva?
Yeah. Okay. So till time my panelists are joining me. So yeah. So it's very imperative for us to know our enemy well. So all of us are fighting the new enemy, which is coronavirus. And what lung cancer has taught us is that we have to know the enemy really well up to 1%. So even if the 1% of the enemy can be harmful to us, we should be able to hit that even 1%. Please, next slide. Also, all of us are strictly following social distancing. There are people who are also doing spiritual distancing. So people have named the year from Corona to Ebola. There are a lot of innovations happening around the world. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so coming to the case. So this is 75-year-old lady, non-smoker, and at presentation had cough and breathlessness, and also had pleural effusion. Cytology was positive, and so was diagnosed as stage 4 adenocarcinoma, which was proven on biopsy. And then the initial markers which were done, this was in 2018. So ALK, ROS, EGFR were negative. PD-L1 was 20% positive by SP263. The comorbidities were diabetes mellitus for 20 years and is well controlled. Next slide, please. So this she presented in June 2018, and imaging showed that the CT scan had right upper lobe and middle lobe bronchoalveolar consolidation with some lymphangitis, right pleural and mediastinal lymphadenopathy. EBUS TBNA showed adenosquamous variety, and pleural fluid also was positive for adenocarcinoma cells, and PET scan showed no other sites of metastasis. Next slide, please. So she was started on pemetrexed and carboplatin based chemotherapy. 4 cycles were given, and PET CT showed there was a significant response in the pleural effusion, and there was also some decrease in the lesion which was there in the right upper lobe. After that, she was put on pemetrexed maintenance, which she continued around a year. After that, he had progression of disease. Again, there were new lesions which are coming in bone. So there were L3, L4 disease. And also there was adrenal metastasis. And the patient was actually switched over to, there was a new data which came with Empower 150. And she was put on a quadruple drugs of itolizumab, bevacizumab, paclitaxel, and carbo, which she continued for 4 cycles, but was having a lot of difficulty in managing the toxicity. And she had significant hypertension, and also she had significant neuropathy with these drugs because she was already a diabetic patient. Next slide, please. So now this is a case which has initial good response to chemotherapy, but then had progression and started on a combination chemoimmunotherapy drugs, but had a lot of tolerance issue, as well as her diabetes got worsened, and she also had derangement in the renal dysfunction. So she also had renal dysfunction. So now I'd like to ask my panelists, Dr. Suman, what do you feel among these 3 options would be your choice? How would you like to proceed with this patient?
No, I would go with the NGS.
Okay.
To know the profile actually.
And would you like to wait for NGS report to come and then start your treatment, or would you like to change the treatment right away?
No, right away, what are all the clinical problems patient is having?
So she's a known diabetics which has got worsened with the combination chemoimmunotherapy, and she's not able to tolerate this combination which has been offered to this patient on progression on pemetrexed maintenance.
Okay. She's currently on pemetrexed maintenance.
No. So just one slide back. So she was on pemetrexed maintenance, but then she progressed with new lesions in bone, adrenal, and then she was put on this combination of itolizumab, bevacizumab, paclitaxel, carboplatin, and to which she had an initial good response. She had symptomatic relief in the bone pains, and also her PET CT scan showed response. But then she had she had completed 3 cycles, and she had significant neuropathy, and her diabetes went haywire, and she was not willing to take this any further.
Okay. So anyway, we would need a treatment gap. So I would like to stop chemotherapy, wait for NGS.
Okay.
Once a report comes, I would like to go on with it.
Dr. Shivam, please unmute your mic so that we can also hear your.
Yes, this is something which I would do. I think the patient has significant toxicity. So generally we send the NGS and give a patient a month gap to, to recover from the side effects.
Okay, so treatment break and NGS. Dr. Avinash Rao, Dr. Avinash Rao is there.
Sajjan?
Dr. Gopal Sharma?
Yeah, Sajjan.
Yes,
If patient is not tolerating to chemotherapy, then you can continue immunotherapy as a single agent, atezolizumab. And meanwhile, you can send the NGS because BRAF was not done initially, and now we have the.
Okay, sir.
And
so
there is very good data, so you can continue the immunotherapy. Meanwhile, during that period.
Okay. Next slide, please. So there were three options. So would we be interested in sending the whole NGS, or because all other things have been done in the previous setting also. So EGFR, ALK, ROS1, MET, and PD-L1 was done when we started the treatment. Or should we just send for BRAF? So any of you can take this up. Should we actually go for NGS now, or we can just get BRAF, because BRAF will be available to us in next 5 days. So if we just go for dedicated RT-PCR for BRAF, will that be sufficient, or should all the panelists agree that NGS is a better choice at this point of time?
Generally, NGS is a better choice because at any point of time we will be needing further testing.
Yeah.
Even if you do a BRAF and start directed BRAF directed therapy, even in that case we may need further testing in the future. So better to go with NGS itself.
Okay. So there's a request from Dr. Nitesh, and I also like to include him as one of our experts because he has given us such a wonderful lecture to us. So can you please unmute Dr. Nitesh?
Thank you, Sajjan. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I was only commenting that this is not, I mean, we are in the panel, this will be positive BRAF patient, but she's not fitting into a BRAF positive case. So I would not do a single gene testing for BRAF. I'm not expecting her to be BRAF positive. If this patient was failing, first line, second line, and I'm scratching my head and NGS is not affordable, I would push for BRAF. That's what the point I was trying to make, that if she's failing therapy, I would push for BRAF single gene at least. But this patient actually has had a fairly prolonged pemetrexed sensitivity. I don't know if I would have pushed for single agent BRAF.
Okay. So I agree with you with most of the patients who have got a BRAF are females, they had no CAs, but they have a more rapidly progressive disease, as you mentioned in your presentation. Then 20% patients might have an atypical presentation. But yes, I agree that most of us will agree that now is the time to not send only BRAF, but get a proper NGS. And as also our Dr. Aparna also showed that it's just whatever we check is only the tip of the iceberg, and probably NGS might be a better modality for us to check at this point of time. Next slide, please. So we know that now the treatment paradigm for non-small cell lung cancer has actually become very complex, and it involves whether we have a disease which is oncogenically addicted versus this slide has been shown. I'll just skip this slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this also will skip it here. Yeah. So no, just skip this slide. I think we already discussed these characteristics here. So NGS actually was done, and it showed, again, they also had a rechecking of PD-L1. So BRAF was found to be V600E mutation was there, and PD-L also was 20% positive by 22C3. And please go to the next slide. Now, at this point in time, because at that time, we didn't have availability of this drug there, and it was tried to get this on a compassionate ground. But while we were working for this, so I think there are 4-5 things which we can do at this point in time. So among these 5 options, which is BRAF inhibitor alone, which is dabrafenib, pembrolizumab, or sorafenib probably, because that was in last year, or compassionate use of BRAF MEK, or immunotherapy, because the patient had 20% positivity of PD-L1. So as Dr. Gopal said, that immunotherapy could have been continued. And other option was to go back to single agent chemotherapy, or re-challenge with chemotherapy, or only giving best supportive care or giving a treatment holiday. So amongst all these options, and in such a patient, what the panelists feel is the best way forward. So Dr. Shivam, what do you feel is the best way forward for this patient?
So, I think at this data that we have with good overall response rates, I think I would have gone with BRAF and MEK inhibition, especially compassionate basis it's available.
Okay. Dr. Suman Kalyan, what is your choice?
Yeah, if the performance studies is good and patient is, understanding the prognosis, I will go ahead with the second choice, that is BRAF plus MEK. Since even though PD-L1 is raised, BRAF is generally the dominant driver mutation in these patients if BRAF is positive. So better choice is to go with the second one, that is BRAF with MEK, and reserve immunotherapy for later.
Okay. Dr. Gopal Sharma.
But Sajjan, this patient was already on immunotherapy at Zolomab.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The
Yeah,
patient
so
was
there is further there is no role of Pembro or Nivolumab. So either you can continue on atezolizumab with patient responding. Otherwise, best option is this combination, dabrafenib and trametinib. Already, Dr. Nitesh elaborated very well.
I think the question is, if you did not have the combination, or in the era, if the patient can't afford the combination, then would you give immunotherapy single agent in these patients, or re-challenge chemo or palliative care? I think that's a key question to me.
Okay.
If BRAF inhibitor is not available in that case.
So I will just add one more this question to this. So either it is not available, or like Dr. Nitesh had told, that a lot of these patients can be PD-L1 positive. They can be more than 80-90% positive. So among both the choices, when you have both the choices, what would be your preferred choice?
See, if available, then best choice is second one, this dabrafenib plus trametinib. Okay. And if not available, then continue immunotherapy. Anyone?
Dr. Nitesh, would you also be comfortable?
I have an issue with that actually, because there is some when they were initially doing the French studies, when this is the biggest data we have from the French group, patients with BRAF on single agent immunotherapy, although positive, don't tend to respond.
Okay.
So my guess is that your patient responded because of the combination of bevacizumab and the immunotherapy. I think it was the combination of bev and immuno which really triggered it. I think that's something I'll possibly read tonight and see if that group, as we've seen, that in targeted driven lung cancer, there is something which bev adds to. So, but personally, I would not give single agent immunotherapy in a BRAF.
Okay. Okay. Next slide, please. So the patient had this toxicity with the combination, and she was shifted to dabrafenib, trametinib, and this was used on a compassionate use. Next slide, please. So this, I think, data has been shared. I think we have a shortage of time, and I've been instructed that probably rest all topics will be covered probably in the subsequent this thing. But thank you all of you, and any other questions you have where we can have a comment from Dr. Nitesh. Any questions from a panelist? Okay, then thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Purvesh, and over to the organizers.
Thank you very much, Sajjan. And Kashish, please go for the next part of the program.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Meenu, can you hear me, ma'am?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. You can share your slides now.
I'll just
over to you, ma'am. Yeah. Until that time, I'll just let you know the panelists that are there today. Dr. Uma Dangi, Dr. Kumardeep Datta, Dr. Shefali Sardana, and Dr. Rajat Saab.
And there were other panelists, I think Dr. Bela Raman.
Ma'am, he has not joined us. So he's unable to join us.
We have 4 panelists with us.
4 panelists, correct, ma'am.
So I think we are already running behind schedule, and I will go straight to the case. So what? So we have here a 57-year-old lady who presented with history of some nodules on her right neck and axillary region for most open.
Dr. Rajat, can I request you to mute your mic and you can unmute it when ma'am is asking you the question?
An FNAC of this subcutaneous nodule had already been done outside, which had revealed metastatic melanoma. And patient also had some history of skin depigmentation on several parts of her body. Physical examination revealed multiple nodules on the right side of her neck, multiple lymph nodes in the axilla. There were vitiligo patches and also soot and nevus on her abdomen. So these are the few of the pictures, her neck, her vitiligo patches and the nevus in her abdomen. However, there was no skin lesion which could suggest the primary cutaneous melanoma or some pigmented skin lesion. So that was it. So what next? Obviously, I'll ask one of my panelists, Dr. Rajat. So a lady presented with multiple nodules, multiple neck nodules, multiple armpit nodules, lymph nodes, no primary cutaneous pigmented lesion, and FNAC done outside consistent with malignant melanoma.
So here, I think so. We should have a complete excisional biopsy of one of the nodules, and that will means there are multiple nodules, or there is only one nodule means.
There are multiple neck nodules, and multiple axillary lymph nodes.
Okay, so we will have an excisional biopsy of one of the nodules with a good margin status, and that tissue can subsequently be tested for and subsequently we can also have an FNAC from one of the axillary lymph nodes, image guided axillary lymph node FNAC. If that also reveals a melanoma, and the excisional biopsy can reveal the characteristic of the melanoma, and subsequently we can test those for the BRAF mutational status and all.
So exactly, I mean, not relying on the FNAC, we need a tissue or a histopath evidence. But before that, probably we would like to do a otolaryngological examination to rule out the mucosal lesion anywhere else. Probably because there are multiple neck nodules, I guess a mucosal lesion needs to be ruled out. And going further, what about radiological imaging? We normally sequence radiological imaging. Actually, both of them go hand in hand. So, Dr. Shefali, you will go for a histopath first, or it will go hand in hand, or you will go for radiological imaging first, then guide your radiological imaging to take a tissue diagnosis or a biopsy.
So,
Dr. Shefali,
since yeah. Hello, am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so now the patient has multiple subcutaneous nodules as well as multiple axillary nodes, and there is a suspicion of melanoma already on FNA. So I would, simultaneously go for an imaging and a biopsy of one of these subcutaneous nodules. And I would prefer a PET CT for this patient, because already to delineate the disease volume load in such patient, and melanoma has PET is sensitive for the melanoma nodules. So I would prefer a PET CT for this patient for a metastatic workup, simultaneously going for a biopsy from one of the subcutaneous.
I don't think there must be any difference of opinion all across the panel. PET CT is the imaging of choice in advanced melanoma cases, not only very sensitive, but also very specific also, and can detect changes very early. And as Dr. Rajat pointed out, biopsy is the way to go. FNAC is something we do not rely in today's date for most malignancies. And apart from that, for doing further tests also, probably we will be doing a biopsy. And among the biopsies, what will be the preferred mode of biopsy? Excisional, incisional, or a core biopsy? Dr. Uma Dangi, if you are there.
Yeah, hi. I would probably go for the excisional biopsy of the nodule which was positive on FNAC for metastatic melanoma. So I think that would be the choice of biopsy for me.
Yeah, exactly. So excisional biopsy, if feasible, should be the method, should be the biopsy of choice. But if at all, if not feasible, then core biopsy is good enough. Also good. So that is what was done for this patient. Pathological examination was done, revealed IHC was along with IHC that was consistent with metastatic melanoma. and what next? So apart from having a histopathological in a ISC consistent with metastatic melanoma, Dr. Kumar, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I am there.
Dr. Kumar, what other tests you would like to get it done in this case?
After confirmation of melanoma, I'll like to do BRAF V600 mutation and KIT PDL1 also. Like simultaneously, I will advise for PDL1.
So you will want to do a BRAF and a KIT and a PDL1.
Yeah.
You would not like to go for a complete genomic panel, NGS?
NGS at present, I have to outsource it, so it is not inpatient. I mean, hospital, it is not available. But definitely, the preferred modality is NGS.
So if NGS was available, then you would have preferred to do a NGS rather than BRAF. Or,
yeah, definitely.
So Dr. Rajat, any difference of opinion? Dr. Rajat?
Yeah, NGS would additionally pick up, in addition to V600 and KIT, we should also get some, there are certain subset of patients with NRAS mutations also.
Yeah.
So that can also be picked up in addition. So, and the comprehensive NGS panel is preferable rather than doing all these things piecemeal.
So do you get PDL1 also done in your patients of malignant melanoma?
Generally, none of the trials of immunotherapy have looked at PDL1 testing. So it is not imperative for me to do a PDL1 testing.
So you
irrespective of the PDL1.
So you will not do PDL1 testing.
Can I justify?
Yeah.
Can I justify?
Yeah,
suppose BRAF is negative. I have to start with the PDL, anti-PD immunotherapy. So whether to go ahead with a single drug or multiple drug, if it is more than 5%, definitely single drug is good enough. But if it is less than 5%, where the prognosis is not that good with a single drug, we can go ahead with the combination of immunotherapies. So that is the only one.
Yeah, exactly. Although
can I add one comment?
Yeah, Shefali.
Yeah, so I would agree with Dr. Kumardeep, and over and above that, the single agent Pembro also showed overall survival advantage in patients who were PDL1 positive. So I think it's not imperative. I would agree with Dr. Rajat to start a therapy on immuno for a metastatic melanoma, but at the other outset, I mean, it will help us to prognosticate and predict the response in some cases and choose the dual immuno over the single agent.
So Dr. Uma, do you also agree with the rest of the panelists?
Yeah, I agree a little bit with Rajat, saying that, I mean, PDL1 would actually, I may not decide my treatment based just on the expression. So I would obviously definitely want to do a BRAF testing. NGS or PCR, either or is fine, but I would not be so insistent on PDL. And interestingly, however, the TMB may give me a more information, saying that, there is some data to suggest that high tumor mutation burden patients may not respond as well to the BRAF inhibitors as the low tumor mutation burden. So that would probably be more interesting.
So actually, none of the studies of immunotherapy in malignant melanoma have used PDL1 levels as a baseline or as a criteria for giving immunotherapy. But as Dr. Kumardeep also pointed out, if PDL1 levels all across the studies, what we found was that if PDL1 level is more than 5%, then possibly single agent, either nivolumab or Pembro, the results were equally good. And if it was less than 5%, low PDL1, probably it helps in deciding that a combination of immunotherapy is better. And regarding tumor mutation burden, yes, there is some data, as with other malignancies, high tumor mutation burden, immunotherapy may help, but at present there is no consensus and not routinely done and neither advocated as a baseline testing. So this patient turned out to be, I'll say, wild type BRAF, no mutation, and a good performance status, no other comorbidities, and not to forget our classical prognostic marker, and LDH was done and the LDH was normal. So the final diagnosis, metastatic melanoma. Probably the primary had gone into spontaneous regression, not so uncommon that we see, associated with huge masses in the neck and the axilla, associated with vertigo. Any other test? What about brain imaging? Anybody in the panel, anybody can take this question. So our workup is complete with a PET CT and a biopsy and a BRAF and a kit, or people will also will want, or we will want to do a brain imaging also in an asymptomatic patient.
The patient is asymptomatic, and I'll not advise for brain imaging. Even if asymptomatic brain mets is there, we have to start with the systemic therapy. No need for local therapy. So if the patient is asymptomatic for, even in case of the brain metastasis, I will not advise for any brain MRI.
We will not ask for brain imaging. What, Dr. Rajat? Dr. Rajat?
I agree with Dr. Karthik. I don't think CT has not revealed any major. I will not go in for brain imaging.
Any other
Am I audible?
opinion?
Yeah. So,
Yeah, Rajat, we
ma'am,
can hear you.
I would go for a brain imaging in this patient. That will solve two purposes. Number one, I would have a baseline idea of even asymptomatic metastasis in the brain present to compare the response and to assess if, and the second point is to assess if it is at such a location.
So,
because we know that onset of duration and response duration, yeah.
So, malignant melanoma is one of those malignancies where even asymptomatic MRI brain is warranted, because brain metastasis, if picked early and treated even in asymptomatic phase, seems to make a difference in the progression-free survival. So if we go by the guidelines, even in asymptomatic case, any malignant melanoma stage 3 onwards should have a baseline MRI brain also done. So the final diagnosis was an unresectable stage 4. Patient symptomatic from the disease, BRAF, no BRAF mutation, no previous systemic therapy. So the next big question, what next? So I'll ask all the panelists to take this one by one. I mean, what will be the therapy of this? Dr. Rajat?
The combination of nivolumab, ipilimumab is the best combination in this setting, I would say.
So you will want to take want to give nivolumab and ipilimumab irrespective of the PD-L1 level? We have not done PD-L1. You've never wanted to do a PD-L1.
Nivolumab, ipilimumab shows the better overall response rates and longer relapse-free survival as compared to single-agent nivolumab or pembrolizumab. All the options are correct: nivolumab alone, pembro alone, or nivo-ipi. But I think so the better combination.
Dr. Shefali?
Yeah, ma'am. So I would like to choose, select my treatment on the basis that if it is a CNS involvement and PD-L1 more than 5%, I would prefer to take.
No CNS involvement.
Okay. So then in case of no CNS involvement, I would have all three options correct, but on the basis of toxicity profile, I would like to choose the single agent immuno as compared to the dual agent and reserve my ipilimumab combination if may be required and if the patient is in a condition to take it later in CNS progression. So, if you see the 5-year benefit rate or the response rate, there was a little difference between two. Obviously, combination immuno preferred over the single agent, but considering toxicity and other profiles, I would prefer a single agent here.
Dr. Uma, your take on this?
I would also prefer a single agent here. I know that, there is one question of availability of IP in our country right now. But yeah, the easier toxicity profile is much favorable with single agent. So I would prefer to go for a single agent.
Dr. Kumardeep? Dr. Kumar?
Again, am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead.
So again, the question is, what is the best agent available? When the PS is right, for dual agent, whether you have to give, you will give dual agent first and reserve it for a later, or reserve it for a later date when the PS is not that conducive for a dual agent. So that is the basic question. I think I will go ahead with the dual agent first, go for the kill from the first cycle.
So I think we have a divided house, 50% saying single agent and 50% saying combination. And the options, we will come to it again. So this patient was actually started with single agent only. So we know that both single agents are approved indications for metastatic melanoma, nivolumab as well as pembro. Checkmate 07, nivolumab, much better than ipilimumab, and the combination of nivolumab plus ipilimumab much better than either or. The overall response rate was to the tune of 58%, as what Dr. Rajat was pointing out, with the combination compared to 44% with nivolumab alone. However, yes, it had come, the trial had showed significant toxicity, and there were significant dropouts also in this trial, and important the status and whether the patient is fit enough to go for combination. And we have all in our practice, we have been seeing immune-related toxicities. So just across the panel, I would want to know if anyone has used combination so far in any of the patients and what have been in their experience. So I think Dr. Kumardeep and Dr. Rajat both favored combination. So anybody amongst you who have used combination, and what is your experience in that patient?
No, personally, I have not used a combination. We have used single agent many times, but never a combination. But it has been seen and it has been discussed across trials that if we are able to decrease the dose of ipilimumab to 1 mg per kg rather than the original 3 mg per kg, the side effect profile is better managed. So as and when it is available in India, I would like to start with 1 mg per kg ipilimumab.
And what about Dr. Kumardeep? Any experience with the combination?
No. I've never used a combination Nivo-Ipi. Rather, there are some interesting data about Nivo 3 mg and Ipi 1 mg, where the side effect profile is manageable.
Yeah. So that is it was a phase 2 data actually, and I mean phase 3 showed discontinuation rate of approximately 40%. So
no,
I mean
that discontinuation rate
would be.
Hello.
Hello.
Dr. Shefali is probably gone offline. So, Dr. Uma, you have had any experience with the combination?
No, I have never used the combination.
So, basically in that trial, that was again, as Shefali pointed out, 46% was the rate of discontinuation. But yes, the controversy remains. We can have better response rate, better progression-free survival, and a better OS also with the combination, provided at the cost of increased toxicity. So that is definitely something for which we all need to see. And combination definitely have much more toxicity. But yes, as Rajat and Kumardeep both pointed out, the modification of giving ipilimumab only 1 mg per kg, the toxicity was much less. And in the group that had toxicity, they also had to give immunosuppressants when both these double agents were used. So this was another prospective trial where although there was significant toxicity, 91% patients who had toxicity, out of which 72% actually required steroids. So toxicity is something that we need to consider whenever we are giving a combination thing. So coming back to our case, so the patient was started with single agent, and within 2 weeks, the clinical significant response, and the PET scan done later definitely also showed significant response. And as already pointed out, in case of malignant melanoma, PET is very sensitive and specific, and the responses can be picked up quite early. So going back to the case, had been BRAF mutant, then just a quick one word for the panel, all you, what would have been your first choice? BRAF mutant case, Dr. Uma?
Actually, here you can use, I mean, the immunotherapy has also been used in BRAF mutated patients.
Just one word. What will you know versus pardon?
I'll use the BRAF inhibitors because of the data. The
BRAF and MEK combination or
combination.
Combination. Okay, Dr. Kumardeep.
Yeah, definitely it's a driver mutation. So definitely combination of darbepoetin trametinib.
Dr. Rajat.
Same, darbepoetin trametinib or vemurafenib cobimetinib, either of the two combinations. It should be a combination. Yes.
Same, ma'am. A targeted one would be a better choice for me also.
What is achieved the first panelist done. Although there is data, I think my previous also pointed that whether you give upfront or you give a second line after immunotherapy, there is no response rates are almost the same. The response rates and progression-free survival is almost the same. And there is data to the opposite side also. Immunotherapy does not respond that well if it is done after targeted agents. You give immunotherapy upfront, then give targeted agent, the response rate is almost the same. You give targeted agent first and then immunotherapy doesn't work that well. So even with that data, all of us will want to go for the targeted treatment first?
No, there will be an uncomfortable question from the patient side. If it is positive and you are not giving the specific drug.
So for that, that is entirely a different thing. One can always explain. So what are you going to do? Whether just because of this question, we will start with the combination first.
Yeah. So suppose this combination is like mutation is there, V600 mutation is there, and we are not giving that BRAF inhibitors. First of all, and starting with the immunotherapy, the question may be posed by the attendants or the patient himself. If you are doing
Dr.
that,
Rajat, you will also want to give the combination because of this question of me.
But I still would stick to the BRAF-MEK combination rather than immunotherapy combination.
You would like to give the combination.
I feel you're, trying to, you want to attack the mutation that is driving the tumor. So probably that's the reason why we would want to give it more than anything else.
Definitely.
Although
it can be given in the second line or like
although we know that when given in the second line also we will have equally good responses, but what is important is to know if it is a huge tumor, then the initial tumor shrinkage is especially very impressive with the targeted therapy. With the compared to the immunotherapy, if we just compare the waterfall curves, the targeted therapy, the targeted agents, the initial tumor shrinkage is very good, and that is why whenever the tumor bulk is too great, is quite high, probably the treatment to begin with is the targeted agents. And needless to say, the combination, gone are the days, I think it has already been shown. Single agent is none other days where we only target BRAF, we only target both BRAF plus MEK. Not only that the efficacy is better, the response rates are better, but also because the toxicity is less. When you give both the agents combined, the toxicity is much less rather than a single agent. What we have from these Combi-V and the Combi-D trials, the toxicity was also more in the single agent arm. So,
and the patients will like this because it is an oral agent. These are oral agents, so patients.
So means that is an interesting point which you pointed out. Means the case selection: patients with normal LDH, patients with low disease burden, and patients with a good PS. They can be definitely be started on BRAF-MEK inhibitors, and they will do a good long-term survival. And
so
if the patient has a high disease burden,
Dr. Rajat, I will rather reserve it for the other way around. A patient with a good performance status, with not too much of a tumor burden, with a normal LDH, had a good prognosis, they can be started with the immunotherapy single agent rather than a combination, and targeted agents can be reserved for the second line.
Yeah, so only the good thing was in those trial where the targeted agent was used, there was a rapid response rate. So where there is a large tumor burden and impending organ involvement, so I would agree with ma'am that targeted therapy is a preferred choice, but the only worry was the shorter time duration of the response,
Yes.
average, which the trial showed.
So had this
So
patient
that-
had a huge tumor burden and a high LDH and a poor prognosis, then probably, then needless to say, then targeted agents would have been the way to go.
Right.
So just last 2-3 slides, if the patient had brain mets, so our patient had no brain mets. So if the patient had brain mets and a BRAF mutated patient, what will be our therapy of choice? Dr. Kumardeep?
Yeah, the patient is symptomatic.
Patient is not symptomatic. Asymptomatic has 3 brain lesions and asymptomatic, but BRAF.
What are the location of the tumors, and is there any hemorrhage?
No hemorrhage.
Eloquent cortex, brainstem location.
No, they are not brainstem. They are not critical locations.
The brain directed therapy may not be warranted at this point of time. So the best response has been shown by, again, combination immunotherapy, EP plus Nivo, asymptomatic brain mets without any need for steroid. So they are the candidate for the combination EP plus Nivo. They have shown best result.
So exactly, the combination is definitely found to be much better, especially if there are brain mets and they have got quite a significant results and intracranial benefit in both in progression-free survival and overall response rate is found. And what is also important is that if the patient is symptomatic and one has to resort to radiotherapy, one needs to know that that whole brain RT is generally not recommended. SRS or SRT is the preferred therapy whenever malignant melanoma is there. And plus another point, patient, since this was a patient who was BRAF mutant positive, and once we give this targeted therapy along with cranial RT, there is increased toxicity. There can be increased CNS, pulmonary, and dermatological toxicity. So what is important to remember is that we need to withhold these targeted agents for almost 3 days before and after. So that is important. However, if your patient is on immunotherapy, there is conclusive evidence that there is immunotherapy and continue. And with that, I'll say thank you and really thank all my panelists for a very active discussion. So much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minu. This was really fantastic panel discussion. Everybody was on the ball, and there was a lot of back and forth, and opinions were also there. Can I now pass on to Dr. P.K. Julka for the concluding remarks, please? Dr. Julka, please. Sir, you need to unmute yourself. Dr. Julka, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, sir.
Go
I
ahead.
think there was lovely discussion about the therapies and the therapy, especially in melanomas and in lung cancer. Now we have come a long way, and where we can go mini NGS or multiple genes, we can target the therapy, and that leads to precision therapy in lung cancer. And in melanomas also, we have BRAF mutations, and we have, which we just heard, V600E mutations, and then we have the therapy against V600 mutation. Now, earlier we had never heard of survival in advanced lung cancer. Now with PD-L1 high, with single agent pembrolizumab, we have 5-year survival. From where we have come, 1980s, 70s, and now in 2020, we have achieved a lot in lung cancer and melanoma by doing NGS, by going in for targeted therapies, and we know the driver mutations now. We know individual mutations, and we have been doing HER2 also in lung cancer. And now we have seen the DESTINY trial, trastuzumab deruxtecan, where has been used for lung cancer also besides the breast cancer. And now you see many other agents are being used. Tepotinib has been used for exon 14 EGFR mutations. So this way we come to know of many new things which are coming up in lung cancer. And I think that is the way to go, because I always used to say that if NGS is made cheaper, then everybody should go in for NGS for lung cancer and melanomas also. So I think that is the way to go. Precision medicine and personalized medicine. Dr. Purvesh, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jolka. That was fantastic. Your experience and vision has made it very succinct, the way you have concluded. And of course, NGS is something that we would definitely love to use in each and every patient. The cost is going down, and very quickly the cost will go down even further, probably by another 50%, so that we can really use it well. Thank you very much, Dr. Julka. Thank you, Dr. Meenu, Rajat, Shefali, Kumardeep, Uma. I think others might have already left, but I thank each and every one of the panelists. This was really great because we had several people log in from the SAARC countries as well. At least I could see people from Bangladesh, from Sri Lanka, and from Nepal online. I think Dr. Ahmed is still there online. So this is really good, Meenu. Congratulations to everyone, and thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.